One man gave the order. Within seconds, 80,000 lives were gone. But the story of Hiroshima isn't just about ending a war. Behind that flash was a web of secret memos, military resistance, and private doubts from the very commanders asked to carry it out. Some believed the bomb wasn't necessary. Others thought it was never really about Japan at all. This is the untold battle inside the US government. The real story of how the first nuclear strike was decided.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
In the first few seconds after 8:15 a.m., 70,000 people died instantly. The temperatures at the center of the explosion reached 6,000 degrees Celsius. The bomb created a piece of hell on Earth that lasted for several seconds. But this weapon of unimaginable power didn't appear overnight. Its creation had required the largest and most secretive military operation in American history. By late 1941, Einstein's letter led to the S-1 program that became the Manhattan Project. What began as a small research program quickly grew into the most expensive and secretive military project the United States had ever attempted. The project's scale was unlike anything anyone had seen before. General Leslie Groves ran the military side, while physicist Robert Oppenheimer led the scientific team. Together, they managed 130,000 workers spread across secret facilities in multiple states. The government built dozens of secret towns to house scientists working under total secrecy. Most residents had no idea what they were actually working on. They just knew their job was important for the war effort. The original goal was clear. America needed to build an atomic bomb before Hitler did.
I don't need to tell you what could happen if the Germans developed this technology before we do.
Scientists feared that Germany's advanced nuclear research would give them a weapon that could win the war. This fear drove the project forward at an incredible pace. Researchers worked around the clock, solving unprecedented technical challenges on a wartime timeline. The project actually developed two different bomb designs at the same time. The first design used uranium and was called Little Boy. This bomb worked like a gun that fired one piece of uranium into another piece to create a nuclear explosion. The second design used plutonium and was called Fat Man. This bomb was much more complex. It used conventional explosives arranged in a perfect sphere to crush a plutonium core and trigger the nuclear reaction. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, scientists and military leaders suddenly faced a difficult question. Should they continue with the project now that Germany was defeated?
In the city of Reims, once under the German heel, stands the schoolhouse where the terms of unconditional surrender are to be signed.
Japan was still fighting, but many people wondered if the atomic bomb was necessary to end the Pacific War. The Trinity test in New Mexico on July 16, 1945, proved that the plutonium bomb actually worked. The explosion was so bright that people could see it from 200 miles away. The mushroom cloud rose 40,000 feet into the sky. Scientists who witnessed the test knew they had created something that would change warfare forever. One scientist described it as magnificent and terrifying. President Truman learned about the Manhattan Project only after Roosevelt died in April 1945.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin from CBS World News. A press association has just announced that President Roosevelt is dead. The president died of a cerebral hemorrhage. All we know so far is that the president died at Warm Springs in Georgia.
General Groves briefed the new president on the massive program that had been running in secret for years. Groves told Truman that Japan had always been the target for the atomic bomb. This came as a shock to Truman, who had no idea such a weapon existed. The project cost $2 billion, over $28 billion today, more than all tanks or ships built by the US in World War II. This massive spending showed how seriously American leaders took the threat of German atomic weapons. The Manhattan Project created a weapon that would fundamentally change how wars are fought. Nuclear weapons made it possible to destroy entire cities with a single bomb. This changed the basic rules of warfare that had existed for thousands of years. But even with this ultimate weapon ready, the decision to use it would prove more controversial than anyone expected. The bomb's creators had built the most powerful weapon in history, yet the question of whether to actually use it was about to divide America's top leadership. Some of America's most respected military commanders privately questioned whether the atomic bomb was necessary at all.
Looking back now, do you think that our country's use of the bomb was necessary?
I believe that the view which I learned from many, but above all from General Marshall and from Colonel Stimson, the Secretary of War, the view that they had, that we would have to fight our way to the main islands, and that it would involve a slaughter of Americans and Japanese on a massive scale, was arrived at by them in good faith, with regret, and on the best evidence that they then had. To that alternative, I think the bomb was an enormous relief.
General Dwight Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander who had just led the successful invasion of Europe, later confessed his misgivings about the decision. When Secretary of War Henry Stimson told him about plans to use the atomic bomb against Japan, Eisenhower voiced what he called grave misgivings about the decision. He told Stimson directly that he believed Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was unnecessary. Eisenhower's concerns went beyond just military strategy. He worried about how the rest of the world would see America if it used such a terrible weapon against cities full of civilians. He thought it would damage America's reputation and moral standing. This was coming from a man who had seen the worst of what war could do during the fighting in Europe. Admiral William Leahy was even more direct in his opposition. Leahy served as Chief of Staff to both President Roosevelt and President Truman, which put him at the center of all major military decisions. After the bombs were dropped, Leahy stated on record that the atomic bombs were of no material assistance in our war against Japan. He believed Japan was already ready to surrender because of the naval blockade and conventional bombing campaigns that had been going on for months. Leahy's position was based on what he was seeing in intelligence reports. The naval blockade had cut off Japan's supply lines and was starving the country of resources needed to continue fighting. Japanese cities were being destroyed by massive incendiary raids almost every night. From Leahy's perspective, Japan was beaten and just needed time to accept defeat. General George Marshall also had doubts about using the atomic bomb against cities. Marshall was the Army Chief of Staff and one of the main architects of American victory in World War II. What makes Marshall's case interesting is that he was the only high-level official whose pre-bombing doubts were officially recorded in government documents. Most other generals kept their concerns private or only shared them in personal conversations. These military leaders had alternative strategies that they believed would force Japan to surrender without using atomic weapons. The naval blockade was already cutting off Japan's access to oil, food, and raw materials. Conventional bombing was destroying Japanese cities and industrial capacity. Some officials also believed that diplomatic negotiations could bring about surrender if America was willing to let Japan keep its emperor. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey later proved that these generals were right about Japan being close to defeat. This survey was commissioned by Secretary of War Henry Stimson to study the effects of bombing in both Europe and the Pacific. The survey concluded that Japan would have surrendered even if the atomic bombs had not been dropped, even if Russia had not entered the war, and even if no invasion had been planned or contemplated. The Strategic Bombing Survey found that Japan's economy was already crippled. The destruction of the oil industry and truck manufacturing had made it impossible for Japan to supply its military forces. Japanese leaders knew they couldn't continue fighting much longer. While these experienced commanders questioned the bomb's necessity, civilian leaders in Washington had already formed a secret committee with a very different mission. The Target Committee met in secret to apply a chilling formula for selecting which Japanese cities would be destroyed. General Leslie Groves formed this committee with one main job: pick the targets for the atomic bombs. But their approach was different from normal military planning. Instead of focusing just on military targets, they prioritized psychological impact over everything else. The committee wanted to break Japan's will to fight by creating maximum shock and terror. They turned the atomic bomb into a weapon of psychological warfare. The goal was not just to destroy military facilities. The goal was to create such overwhelming fear that Japanese leaders would surrender immediately after seeing what the bomb could do. The Target Committee developed specific criteria for choosing cities. They wanted large, previously undamaged cities that would demonstrate the bomb's full destructive power. This balance was crucial for creating the spectacle of destruction they were looking for. The committee also wanted cities that had not been heavily damaged by previous bombing raids. If a city was already partly destroyed, people might think the damage came from regular bombs instead of the atomic weapon. The committee's records show they used careful language to hide their real intentions. They described their targets as vital war plants closely surrounded by workers' houses. This phrasing made it sound like they were attacking military targets when they were actually planning to kill civilians. The committee specifically chose targets for their civilian presence to amplify fear and psychological impact. Kyoto was originally the top choice for the first atomic bomb. The ancient capital of Japan had enormous cultural and religious importance to the Japanese people. The Target Committee believed that destroying Kyoto would have the greatest psychological impact on Japanese leaders and citizens. But Secretary of War Henry Stimson personally intervened to remove Kyoto from the target list. Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, and Nagasaki were all considered suitable targets. Hiroshima's layout promised maximum destructive impact. The committee calculated that civilian casualties would actually help achieve American objectives. They believed that massive civilian deaths would convince Japanese leaders that continuing the war was hopeless. But as the bombing mission approached, some of the very people who had created this terrible weapon were about to make a desperate attempt to stop it. Leo Szilard led the effort to prevent the bombing. Szilard had conceived the nuclear chain reaction in 1933, making him one of the founding fathers of atomic theory. After Germany's defeat, he realized that using the bomb against Japan could start a dangerous nuclear arms race between countries. Szilard requested a meeting with President Truman to explain why the bomb shouldn't be used against cities full of people. The Frank Report warned that how America used this new weapon would determine the future of the world. The scientists predicted that dropping atomic bombs on cities would lead to an arms race where every major country would try to build nuclear weapons. But government officials ignored the report completely. The recommendations never made it to the people making the final decisions. The government set up something called the Scientific Panel to get advice from scientists about the atomic bomb. But the panel was carefully chosen to include only scientists who would support using the weapon. The scientific panel ended up recommending direct military use of the bomb. They stated that, "We can propose no technical demonstration likely to bring an end to the war. We see no acceptable alternative to direct military use." On July 17th, Szilard organized a petition to President Truman that was signed by 70 scientists from the Manhattan Project. The petition asked Truman not to use atomic bombs unless Japan had been given clear surrender terms and had rejected them. The scientists warned about setting a dangerous precedent for using nuclear weapons. They said America had a solemn responsibility to be careful with such powerful weapons, since it was the first country to have them. But General Groves made sure the petition never reached President Truman. On August 1st, as the bomb neared readiness, Groves held back the petition until after the weapon was deployed. There's no evidence that Truman ever saw what the scientists wrote. This meant the voices of the people who best understood nuclear weapons were completely silenced during the decision-making process. An internal poll among scientists at the Chicago facility showed mixed opinions about how the bomb should be used. Only 19 scientists rejected any military use completely. Most supported using the bomb in some way, though many preferred a demonstration over attacking cities directly. While scientists debated in secret meetings, the final preparations for the mission were already underway on a remote Pacific island. On the morning of August 6th, Colonel Paul Tibbets and his crew carried out the most consequential bombing mission in human history. The Enola Gay, a B-29 Superfortress bomber, sat on the runway at Tinian Island loaded with the Little Boy atomic bomb. The aircraft weighed 150,000 pounds with the 9,000-pound bomb and 7,000 gallons of fuel. Tibbets had named the plane after his mother, a personal touch that seemed strange given what they were about to do. Tibbets had learned about the true nature of his mission when he was briefed on April 25th about the atomic bomb project. The crew received their final briefing, but many still didn't know exactly what weapon they were carrying. A photographic plane accompanied the mission to record data from the bombing, showing how seriously the military took documenting this unprecedented weapon test. At 7:30 a.m., while the Enola Gay was already on its way to Hiroshima, Parsons inserted the explosive charge and detonator into the bomb. Hiroshima had clear skies, which sealed the city's fate. At 8:15 a.m. local time, the Little Boy bomb fell from the Enola Gay and detonated 2,000 feet above Hiroshima. The crew was flying at high altitude when they released the bomb. The explosion was unlike anything they had ever seen. The mushroom cloud rose 40,000 feet into the sky. The crew could see the blast from 373 miles away, which showed just how powerful the explosion was. The aircraft shook from the blast wave, even though they were far from ground zero. The pilots realized they had just witnessed something that would change warfare forever. Back in Japan, the government's first reaction was complete denial. The Atomic Bomb Countermeasures Committee refused to believe that America had actually used an atomic bomb. They thought such a weapon was impossible. Even as reports came in about the total destruction of Hiroshima, officials in Tokyo insisted it must have been caused by conventional bombs. The Japanese government sent physicist Yoshio Nishina to investigate what had happened to Hiroshima. When Nishina saw the devastation firsthand, he understood immediately that an atomic weapon had been used. He reportedly wrote that everyone involved in Japan's bomb program should commit harakiri because they had failed so completely. The crew of the Enola Gay returned to Tinian Island knowing they had carried out the most important bombing mission ever flown. They had proven that atomic weapons could destroy cities in ways that conventional bombs never could. What they had witnessed above Hiroshima would mark a turning point that went far beyond ending a war. The atomic bombing of Hiroshima didn't just end World War II. It split human history into before and after the atomic age. This single event created the nuclear dilemma that still shapes international relations today. Emperor Hirohito's intervention after both bombings was crucial for Japan's surrender, showing that the nuclear weapons alone wouldn't have forced capitulation without his decision to break the deadlock among Japanese leaders. The scientists who tried to stop the bombing were right about one thing. Using atomic weapons against cities did start an arms race that began immediately. Within 3 years, the Soviet Union tested its own nuclear weapon in 1949. Countries spent billions building nuclear weapons while trying to prevent others from getting them. But the bombings also created a moral taboo that has prevented nuclear weapons from being used in warfare since 1945, even during the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. The moment that flash lit up Hiroshima, Humanity entered a new era where we have the power to destroy ourselves completely. What do you think? Were any of the reasons enough to justify Hiroshima? If you want to follow the story of Ivy Mike Bomb, check out our video here.